So good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Well, I'm Craig Walls. This is Roy Clarkson. We're going to be talking to you today about a little bit of Spring MVC plus Spring Mobile plus a little bit of client-side JavaScript for good measure. For those of you who may not know, I'm Craig Walls. I'm the project lead for Spring Social.
And I'm Roy Clarkson. I'm the project lead for Spring Mobile and Spring for Android.
And we're going to encourage you. I know you guys are going to have a lot of questions about what we're showing you. By all means, the best time to ask a question is when you have it. So just stop us, interrupt us, ask us whatever you want. We'll do our best to answer the question. If the worst we can do is just say, hey, I don't know, we'll have to get back with you. But we'll do our best, so feel free to interrupt if you need to. All right. Do you have anything?
Nope.
Okay. The web that we work with today has been changing. I mean, the web's been around since as long as I can remember. I mean, I've been around for a while, but I do recall back in college we played with a little thing called Mosaic and some really ugly documents in Mosaic, and it was just kind of a weird time. But the purpose of the web has changed from being a place where we serve documents to a place where we serve applications, and even the applications we're dealing with have changed significantly over time. If you remember back, and I had to get this off the Wayback Machine on the internet, if you remember back, Yahoo is fairly young at this point, and it showed a page full of links to different categories of different bookmarks that somebody has submitted. You had a place to search, but anytime you clicked on a button, the button would take you somewhere. It would do a request to the server, completely refresh the page. Everybody's familiar with this model. I'm sure many of you even still today develop applications in this style, although I hope your applications are prettier than this. I'm sure you're still developing that request, page-oriented style of application. But the one thing that's notable about this is it's targeting a single browser. It's not very interesting. It's just a single browser. And there was the browser wars of the late 90s, early 2000s. Those were fought and nobody won. And now we're dealing with a much different type of browsing scenario these days than we used to. Well, I put this up there just to be complete in the history of this. If you'll recall, there was a time when they had these things called WAP devices. And these were the cell phones that it was really cool to have because you could get on the internet and look at Google and look at Yahoo and look at things like that from your cell phone. But I had one of these things, and once you've used it for about like 2 minutes, you realize this sucks. This is not the web. And so it was nice that we could have access to that, but I found myself just not even wanting to use it. Even if I needed to find some information on the web, I just said, forget it, I'm going to wait till I get home, check it on the browser. So I just put that in there for completeness. We're going to forget that. We're going to move on. We're going to talk a little bit about, web applications that kind of have grown up. And I picked on Google Mail because it's kind of a really good representation of the kind of application we're talking about here, where you have a very rich application, something that's interacting with the server, but not doing so on a page level. It's interacting with it through AJAX calls, hitting a REST API. It's doing dynamic refreshes of different pieces of the DOM to display what it needs to display. And these are the types of applications. If you were here at SpringOne last year, we talked about the next generation application. This is a piece of that puzzle, a richer, more dynamic application where you're not doing this page-oriented stuff. But then there's this thing, the iPhone. And it's really neat, much like the WAP phone, it's really neat that you could get on the internet with your iPhone and you could check Google, you could check Amazon, you could look at whatever. And it was really, if you're like me, you thought it was really awesome that unlike the WAP, you're looking at the real internet. You're seeing a real web page. I mean, this looks like Amazon. It looks exactly like the Amazon you would see if you're looking at it through your desktop browser. And that's the problem, because my desktop browser is quite large and my iPhone is quite small. And it's really difficult to see that. And while it's really neat that I can do that, I find myself having to zoom in to do anything useful with this, and it sort of ruins the usability of the web. And so you've probably familiar with the idea that we have Amazon Mobile. If you hit Amazon from your cell phone, you're more likely to see something like this. It's the same experience that you would get on the desktop, compressed into a smaller space, taking advantage of the unique constraints of the device that you're hitting it on. screen real estate, the touch, the swiping, the different types of navigation. It's still Amazon, but it's fitted to the phone. And unlike the WAP, where it was just ugly, you can still have a fairly rich experience here. It's still HTML, it's still CSS, it's still style sheets, but it's compressed down to the size that you might expect to work with when you're working on a smaller device. And that's great when you're working with mobile devices. But then there's the tablets, the iPads and the Kindle Fires and things like that, where they're treated as mobile devices often, and when you look at a mobile website on an iPad, such as Amazon's, it was sure nice to see that on my iPhone, but it's a horrible experience when I look at it on my iPad. This is not what I want. On my iPad, I would actually like to see the real site, or at very least, I would like to see a unique site geared toward a tablet that takes advantage of the extra real estate that is given to a tablet. So this is what I would much prefer seeing if I was actually hitting Amazon or any other website on my iPad. And this is the thing. People, as we're starting to use applications on the web more and more often, I mean, we all live and breathe by the web, you're going to want to access it anytime, anywhere, and from any device. You're going to want to access it certainly from work when you're using your intranet or using whatever applications that you use at work. You're going to want to access it from home when you're viewing sports scores or whatever it is you like to do on your browser. But sometimes it's really nice if you're sitting on the train to pull out the iPad or the Kindle and Kindle Fire and take a look at it and see what's going on without pulling out. You certainly can't pull out a big desktop, but even a laptop is somewhat inconvenient if you're on a bus or a train. If you're somewhere like the beach, it may just be more convenient to even pull out an iPhone. You still want to access those same applications. You still want to see the same data that you're seeing wherever you're at, but it needs to be comfortable and usable for you in whatever circumstance you're in. And certainly an iPhone fits certain circumstances where a desktop wouldn't. Same thing with the tablet devices. But again, each one of these platforms has different physical capabilities, and you want to offer the same application, but an experience geared toward each one of those. And the key solution to this, a lot of times, is create a unique, aesthetically and functionally, a unique website for each one of these devices. And that's exactly what we showed with the Amazon example. You see that you have a unique mobile Amazon, you have a unique desktop Amazon. And it's great. You want to be able to target the desktop browsers, the iPads, the tablets, and the iPhones, handhelds, Androids, what have you. But now you have a problem. Because especially when you're writing these richer applications, these applications that consume a lot of JavaScript, that sit there and just churn the JavaScript, you find yourself needing the same JavaScript oftentimes on your mobile device, on your tablet, and on your desktop browser. And it's a shame that you've duplicated code. It's a shame that you've built this application up and you have some unique features on each one of those. You have some unique style sheets, some unique images, and even some unique JavaScript for each one of those devices. But a lot of it's the same. A lot of the core application on the device is the same regardless of what device you're on. And you want to be able to reuse that as much as you can. So yeah, now you have a problem because you're duplicating code. Well, an addendum to that solution is to use something like Spring Mobile, which Roy's going to speak about here in a minute. Spring Mobile, as Roy will tell you, is an extension to Spring MVC that is able to detect what kind of device is hitting the Spring MVC application, and based on the device, direct the client to an appropriate site specific for that device. Well, that's part of the puzzle. Where Spring Mobile is great at directing to a device-specific site, we still need the ability to build up these applications in a device-specific way. And so I'm going to show you one option. This is not the only option. It's just one option I found that I enjoy, called Lumbar. Lumbar comes from the folks at Walmart Labs. They've generated some fantastic code out there, including Lumbar and the framework I'm using with it called Thorax. And what Lumbar is essentially it's a build tool. And as we'll see later, it has the ability of taking a big code base, picking out pieces of it that are common regardless of what device you're on, and then also picking out the pieces that are specific to each device, and then spraying that out to one device-specific site for each device that you're targeting. And with that, I'm going to let Roy take it over and give you a little bit of insight on Spring Mobile. So, Roy?
Right. It's great to be here. We got a full room. So we're going to walk through Spring Mobile, and as Craig said, it's an extension to Spring MVC. And what it does is it provides support for developing mobile web applications. Now what this isn't is a JavaScript library. So as Craig just described, we're not providing a JavaScript library, but what we are going to show in this demo is how to augment Spring MVC with both Spring Mobile and a third-party JavaScript library of your choice, and Craig's chosen Lumbar and Thorax to do that. So that's where the concept of complementing the client-side mobile frameworks comes from. So the features of Spring Mobile are device detection, and this is a component that allows you to detect what kind of device is hitting your Spring MVC application. And from there you can determine within your controller what you want to do to handle that device in any specific way. We've got a site preference management, and what this is going to do is allow you to set a preference for your users. So if they want to see a mobile site from a desktop browser, or if they want to see the desktop site from a mobile browser, then the site preference manager is going to let your user handle that from within your website. And then we also have a site switcher, and what the site switcher is going to do is allow you to switch between a mobile website to a desktop website and vice versa. And we've got a couple of different implementations for the site switcher, and we'll go through those as we get to those slides. So first up is the device detection. And as I said, it allows you to differentiate requests from various devices. And the way that we're doing this is we're introspecting the HTTP request, and we're looking at the request headers coming in from the device and determining based on a set of known headers for different devices whether it's a mobile device or a desktop device, or normal device as we call it within the device detection. And we provide a device resolver abstraction. So if you wanted to take this, you could implement this on your own device resolver if you needed some different functionality. But we also do provide a light device resolver implementation, and this is basically going to do what we're going to demonstrate later, is that it's going to show you how to detect whether it's a mobile or a desktop browser. And in fact, we also support detecting tablet devices as well. So I know Jürgen made it through all of his keynote last night without showing you any XML, but I'm going to go ahead and show you some right now. So this is how you would configure a device resolver. You've got this device web argument resolver, and then you also have a device resolver handler interceptor. And this is all the configuration that you need to add support to Spring MVC to detect what kind of device your user is hitting your website from. Now the 1.0 release for Spring Mobile, which came out earlier this year, only supported the XML configuration. We've actually recently added support for Java config, but it hasn't been released yet, so look for a release coming out hopefully within a few weeks after SpringOne is over. And I'll actually show you some of that configuration in a little bit too. So in terms of device injection, this would be an example of a basic controller. So as you can see, you've got a device that you're injecting. You can check whether that device is mobile. And in fact, like I said, you can also check it if it is tablet. And from there, you can choose to do whatever you want. Probably more than just have some comments or logging.
Why do you say it's mobile or tablet? Why not look at screen resolution or something like that to make the distinction?
Sure, that's a great question. So the question is, why not look at screen resolution or some other properties of the device to make that determination? So that goes back to us providing an abstraction for Spring Mobile. We don't provide an implementation that is that granular in its detail of resolving the kind of device that's coming to the site, but it is possible to build it. So our initial version included just the light resolver that is only going to be doing the higher level detection between a mobile and tablet. So that certainly is something to, for us to consider in a future version. Yes.
In your earlier where it says slide 11, where you said device.ismobile, so is that capable of detecting any kind of mobile device or specific to iPhone or iPad?
In this case, it's looking for a specific set of keywords within the headers of the device. In fact, I can show you. So like I said, we have a light device resolver, and in this case, we've got, as you can see here, we have a number of known user agents, and these are what are being used to detect whether or not it's a mobile versus desktop or tablet. And this particular device resolver, actually you can override this, and you can modify this list if you find a reason or something that's not working correctly for your use case. Okay. Oh, actually, we were going to do a demo. Okay, so back in STS, I've got a few demos set up, and these are mostly available in the Spring Mobile samples repository that's in GitHub, and the stuff that's not available will be available shortly. So if I start my TC server instance, you can see I've got 4 different examples running in there. Okay, now on Firefox, I'll show you the device resolver. So in this case, you can see that the website's resolving to a desktop browser. Now, if I use I'm using Firefox because it's got a really nice tool. There's an add-on for it called, what's the name of it? User Agent Switcher. And it's got this plug-in support, so you can actually load an XML file with a whole bunch of different user agents in there. So you can see that you can actually test a whole lot of different things. So in this case, we could switch to another device, for example, an iOS device, and change the user agent. And then when we refresh, you can see that it detected that as a mobile device. Okay? Any questions about that? So the interface for the device is right here, and we've got is normal, is mobile, and is tablet. So this is the interface that we use for our device. Okay, switching back to the slides. And moving on. So next component of Spring Mobile is the Site Preference Manager. And the Site Preference Manager allows you to indicate whether your user wants to prefer a mobile site or the main website. And it's going to remember this through some storage capability. And our standard site preference handler actually implements a cookie-based storage. But we've got an abstraction for that, so that if you wanted to implement it in a different way, it's possible. And again, here's the XML configuration for that. And it's just real basic. You add the site preference web argument resolver to your Spring MVC application. And then very similar to the way that you would inject a device, you also can inject your site preference. So your controller can now see which site preference your user has selected when your controller logic performs. So you can return either, in this case, we're returning either a standard home page or a mobile home page. Okay, so let's take a quick demo for that as well. So here's our site preference handler demo, and you can see that we started on a normal site, and then down at the bottom I have the option to select a mobile site or a tablet site. And if I select mobile, you can see that the site preference is passed as a query parameter. And we've actually switched to the mobile site. And then the same thing applies for tablet. And the code to do this was just like what we just showed you in the slide a minute ago. Yes? Right. The site preference handler is actually going to store that in the cookie. That's correct. So if I refresh, it's going to stay on that tablet site. Yes? Sorry, is there a way to get the... Oh, before the request. No, not at this time, but you actually do bring up another point. So you can actually access this within your JSP code as well, so I can show you that. But to answer your question, no, there's not a way to access that before you get to this point. But to show you you can access it in the JSP code. I can bring that up real quick. So right here is actually where we're doing the check within that little menu at the bottom. Is current site preference, mobile, or tablet, or normal, and then we're determining which link to show in your JSP page. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. Now the last component of Spring Mobile is the site switcher, and this is arguably one of the more interesting parts of this. So some applications want to have a mobile site and some want to have a normal site. And I mentioned earlier that we're also working on some additional features to this. We're currently finalizing some additions for supporting tablets in the site switcher as well, but the 1.0 release did not support tablets in terms of site switching. So what we provide is a site switcher handler interceptor. And in addition to the interceptor, we actually also provide a servlet support. So we have both if you prefer to configure it in your servlet. And we also provide 3 different site switchers within this component. One is called mDot, one is called .mobi, and one is called urlPath. And mDot refers to a website called so for example, if you went to CNN.com, you might go to m.cnn.com for the mobile site. And that's just how, so that would be how the site switcher would support switching between those two different sites. So it would handle the request. If it was a mobile request, it would redirect you to mDot.cnn.com, and if it was a desktop request, it would redirect you to just the regular cnn.com. And then .mobi, again, is another somewhat common convention out there, but obviously it requires a top-level domain registration. So if it was cnn.mobi, for example, you could also configure it to use that scheme as well. And then the third option is called urlPath, and what that is we've added this ability to have a component of your URL path where it's actually the mobile website. So you don't have to have different DNS stuff set up to support these different mobile versus normal websites. So here's how you would configure an mDot site switcher. In this case, you're going to pass it a constructor arg, and it's the testdomain.com is just an example domain. And the factory method being called is mDot.
So Roy, let me ask you a tough question. The mDot, and even the Mobi one for that matter, seem to be kind of a binary choice. Where does tablet fall into that?
That's a very good question. So one of the things that we're working on is in the upcoming release is there's going to be another constructor arg that's going to allow you to specify whether or not your tablet users should go to your normal site or your mobile site. So you'll be able to pass a Boolean as another constructor arg. The URL path option, however, actually, because it's not a binary choice, you can actually support multiple, infinite number of configuration options. So, in fact, you could support a tablet path option for tablet users as well.
Very good.
So the .mobi configuration is very simple change. You can see that the factory method simply changes from mDot to .mobi. Otherwise, you still need to pass it the same URL as a constructor arg. And finally, the URL path site switcher configuration. Again, it's another factory method. It's called URL path, and you could pass it value for the mobile site. In this case, it's /m, but this can be really whatever you want. So some of my examples and showcases have /mobi or /mob, but you can make that whatever you like. And then there's a second constructor arg available for setting up the URL path site switcher that allows you to specify a root path. So obviously I'm running this in TC server, and all of these websites are running at some sort of app after the localhost :8080. So what that root path is going to do is handle that app name. So it's going to set that as your root path to your application within your web server. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the site switcher. So in this case, this is going to be the mDot and mDot test domain option, so the mDot configuration. One thing to note is that within your host file, if you're going to want to test this locally, you need to actually add the test URLs that you're wanting to use. So in this case, it's testdomain.com and mtestdomain.com. And then you can see I'm coming from a normal browser right now. So it brings up the normal site, and I can view the About page, or I can go back. But then if I select the mobile site, it actually switches right over to m.testdomain.com. And then if I navigate within the site, it's going to continue to stay on that m.testdomain. But then I can also, through the site preference, switch back over to the regular normal site as well. And actually, let's take a look at some of the code for that. So one of the things that I mentioned is that we're working on the Java configuration. And here's an example of how you will be able to configure the Spring Mobile extension in the next release. So in this case, we've got the site switcher handler interceptor that we're declaring. And we're setting it up with the testdomain.com. And then we also have the site preference handler being configured as well. Okay, so, and then within our home controller, oh, that's the test. So in our home controller, we're, again, checking the site preference and just directing you to the website of your choice or based on the device that came in with the request. Okay, so, yes?
But even though we are having the Spring mobile, that basically switch the user control from one application to one website to another website. But still there will be some replication in the JavaScript or the CSS. Probably you have one CSS for web, there will be another CSS for mobile, right? And probably one JavaScript for your web and one JavaScript for your mobile. Because that's the way the content switcher works, like which JS page, how you are presenting. So is there any further roadmap more on that HTML5 responsive UI in terms of like where the browser detects based on the browser or the device detection, it automatically changes the shape and form?
Sure. Okay, so the question is about the device detection and site switching. It appears from the demonstrations that you're going to require some separate JSPs and JavaScript for mobile versus tablet versus normal site. And the answer to that question is yes for Spring Mobile. So in the current implementations that we have, we're supporting these ideas of this different site for mobile versus different site for normal. Now, to go back to the larger question, though, about the HTML5 and you know, dynamically detecting device attributes and all those kind of things, you know, there's a couple of different schools of thought on this, and this is actually something Craig's probably going to speak about in a little bit more in his section as well. But you know, one thing to consider is that if you're pushing down the entire website that supports every single device, you're also pushing down a lot of assets that don't necessarily have to go down to a mobile device. Does that make sense? So as one option to manage that, Spring Mobile is going to, you know, provide you the ability to support the different websites and through the use of the device detection. So obviously another route to go would be, like you said, using HTML5 and media queries and things like that to do your detection. Right, right. So yeah, obviously that's all going to be on the client side. There's not a lot of interaction on the client side to do with a Spring MVC application besides for serving the assets for those kind of things. But this component, we just wanted to allow the ability to differentiate on the server between the devices coming in for the different requests. So just providing more options for you as a developer to be able to figure out how you want to handle those requests. Yeah.
So in the demo here, it looks like it introduces a fair bit of conditional logic into your controllers between the site preferences and the device switching and so on.
Right.
The way that you've got it set up in the showcase, it worked well for a demo, but is that how you would also organize it in a large-scale production app?
Right. So, I mean, that's a good question. So the question is would you take what I've got in the demo and does that translate well to a large-scale production app? So likely you're not going to have, first of all, every single page necessarily be exposed for mobile versus normal. you're probably not going to have 100% duplication of all of your sites, but there are going to be some pages, or all your pages, there are going to be some that you would have to do that with. And so through the use of the device detector plus the site preference, yes, that does introduce some of that logic in there. One of the things that we're actually working on in the upcoming version, hopefully, is the ability to handle that a little bit further in front of that request so that you don't have so much of that conditional logic. The 1.0 release does not have that in there, though. Right now it's just support for the conditional stuff. Yep. Okay.
We have a question back here.
Behind the pole. Yeah, in fact, so the comment is that you could push that logic down to a view resolver, and in fact, that's one of the approaches that we're considering for the next release is doing exactly that, so that, like you said, you could then just have a -mobi or -mobile on the end of your request, and the view resolver would handle that, and then you wouldn't have to have the different controller spaghetti, right? As you said. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. Yeah, and that's exactly what we're considering doing is and somehow implementing some view resolver logic to keep all those conditionals out of your controller.
Yeah, I distinctly remember having this exact same conversation with Roy a few months ago. So I know it's something Roy's been thinking about.
Okay, so with that ends the Spring Mobile section. Now Craig's going to talk about how to take Spring Mobile and add some of these third-party JavaScript libraries and extend that.
All right. Well, it strikes me that Spring Mobile's pretty good for, I just want to make this clear, it's pretty good for the server-side detection of what kind of device you're on. A lot of people come to Spring Mobile and say, hey, does that work with Android? Well, yeah, because it's not actually working on Android, it's working on the server. Works just as fine on Android as it does on Windows Phone versus iPhone, what have you. And it's really good at that. I mean, a lot of people, and I'm one of these, I was kind of a native application snob, and, I didn't want to build mobile websites. That seemed to be the cheap way out. And I was all about building the native apps. If I'm going to build a native app, that's what I want to do. I don't want to build the mobile apps, but I've kind of matured since then, and I've realized that there's a time and place for both native apps and mobile applications, and then Spring Mobile is great at helping you detect the device and present a mobile website if that's appropriate. But as you've seen so far, Spring Mobile is focused primarily on serving just, determining a static website. It may be dynamic once it gets to the browser, but what it serves is just a dynamic bit of content, some artifacts, some JavaScript, some CSS, and some HTML that gets served to each device. What I want to talk about now is how I've built on top of this, because where Spring Mobile is really good at serving specific content for each device. There's several build tools out in the wild for the JavaScript community. The one I'm going to look at today is Lumbar, that are really good at generating that content in the first place, the device-specific content. Well, what is this? Well, let's talk about Thorax first. I have to talk about Thorax to get it out of the way. This is really not a talk on Thorax. You're going to see some Thorax code in there. The only reason I chose Thorax is because it's the same guys who created Lumbar also created Thorax, and there's a lot of synergy between the two projects. That said, I have to get this out of the way and then let you know that Lumbar is not necessarily tied to Thorax. You can use it with Backbone or pretty much any other JavaScript library or framework you want. It's really just a build tool that certainly has some Thorax ties, but you don't have to use it with Thorax. But to get Thorax out of the way, Thorax is an opinionated Backbone framework. Now, what that means is this. For those of you who may or may not, you may already know Backbone or you're at least familiar with it, a lot of people refer to Backbone as a framework, and I'm a little hesitant to call it that. It's really somewhat disjointed. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's a good collection of functionality that Backbone offers, but to call it a framework is kind of iffy. It offers some really good stuff for working with models. It offers some really good stuff for working with, with your views and some routing stuff. It's got some good stuff, but you can use any one of those elements individually from each other. And it's just when you pull them together, they offer you a nice client-side MVC framework. Well, Thorax takes a different approach. Thorax says, no, here's how you're going to do it. And the reason we're going to have you do that, and this is one of the reasons I like Thorax among some other opinionated frameworks out there, is when I first started working with Backbone, I had no clue how to get started. And you start Googling on, for the word Backbone on the internet, and you find more about chiropractic care than you do anything about JavaScript frameworks. And then this is also true with Thorax and Lumbar, for that matter, and Spine and some of these other ones. But Thorax says, no, with Backbone, I had a hard time figuring out where do I start, where do I get involved in this, where do I dip my toes first. Thorax says, no, here's how you're going to do it. Here's how you're going to build a Backbone application. Thorax, unlike some other frameworks, is not inspired by Backbone. It is built on top of Backbone. And it provides a certain amount of structure to your project. It says, here's how your project needs to be structured. It provides a certain amount of scaffolding. It can generate your application for you. There's a command line tool, much like Rails or Grails would generate your project. Thorax has one of those. And it has a certain amount of on-demand module loading. I'll be honest with you, I'm a little fuzzy on that particular detail at the moment. I'm trying to figure out exactly what that means. It has some special sauce for binding your view with your models and collections. It's got some great stuff for working with events. If you've ever worked with events in Backbone, everything that you've worked with at Backbone is still there in Thorax, but some even better event handling stuff to make it just easier to declare even event handling inline if you need to for smaller events. And there's all this other stuff I've listed there. Again, it's based on Backbone. It's also based on Underscore, which Backbone itself is based on. It leans heavily on Zepto, which is a jQuery-like library. Has more or less the same API as jQuery. It's just a much lighter weight, smaller footprint version of jQuery. Uses handlebars for templating, and maybe you don't like handlebars, and that's okay. You don't have to like handlebars. That's just what Thorax says you need to like. And Stylus for style sheets. It's another one of those less or Sass type better than CSS style sheet languages. Stylus is the one that they lean on. And, of course, Lumbar for doing the build. So that's Thorax. You're going to see some Thorax code, but this is really not a Thorax talk, so I'm not going to spend too much time on those details. Instead, I'm going to talk about Lumbar. It is a build tool. It's not a framework. It's a build tool. It takes a set of code, JavaScript code, CSS, HTML, images, whatever. It's called a JavaScript build tool, but truthfully it's whatever. It's HTML or images and other artifacts as well. It takes that general code base. It also takes little subsets of the code base that are designated for individual platforms, individual devices, and when you run the build, it generates an individual site for each one of those devices. And it doesn't know anything about iPad. It doesn't know anything about Android. It doesn't know anything about iPhones or Windows phones or BlackBerry. It knows nothing about that. It's up to you to tell it, here's the devices I want to support. You can call them whatever you want. In the example I'm going to show you, I've got 3 devices. I've got web, tablet, and mobile, just to keep it simple and also in line with how Spring Mobile works. But it's up to you to define what those devices are, and it's up to you to decide here's what goes into each one of those. And what's really nice about this is you're going to find yourself reusing a lot of the same JavaScript, a lot of the same images at least, and possibly even a lot of the same CSS. You're going to find yourself using that regardless of what platform you're on. And then there's some specific stuff that's going to be for each device, and what you find is a big set of stuff that's general, and ideally a bunch of little things that go to each device, and Lumbar is going to bring those together and give you individual websites for each one of those. It is a pluggable architecture, so if you find ways that you want to extend it, there's great ways of doing that. And yeah, it works with pretty much any JavaScript framework out there. It definitely works best when you're using it with Backbone and Thorax, because that's just where it grew up at. Now, what you're going to need to do to use Lumbar and Thorax for that matter is you're going to have Node and the Node Package Manager installed. I'm not going to show you how to do that. I'm going to just assume you already know how to do that, or you can figure out how to do that on your own. Once you're ready to do that, you're going to want to do an npm install globally with the -g, and you're going to ask for Lumbar and Thorax at version 1.21. Now, here's the tricky part. If you just want Lumbar, just ask for Lumbar. But if you're working with Thorax, the tricky part is this. They're working on a version 2.0 of Thorax currently. And the last I checked, it was still not fully baked. I couldn't get it to really do anything useful, honestly. Very clearly a work in progress. So if you don't ask for a specific version, it's going to go get the 2.0 version. And you don't want that. Well, in the 1.x stream, the most current version is 1.2.3. Oddly enough, it's not in the npm repository. If you want to build it yourself, you can do that. It's not in the npm repository. I'm going to have to deal and email those guys and say, hey guys, can you get that fixed? But right now, the safest route to go is to go ahead and pull 1.2.1 if you're using npm. If you want to use 1.2.3, you can go build it yourself and do it that way. Once you have Lumbar and Thorax installed, you use the command line tool to create your project. You say Thorax, create whatever you want to call the project. You change into the project directory, and at this point you're ready to build it. Now, Thorax has several other commands as well, like models and collections and views and things to generate various artifacts as part of your JavaScript Backbone Thorax project. But at this point you're ready to build it, and you can actually build it and run it at this point and say Lumbar, which is another command line tool you get from the Lumbar project. Build is the thing you want to run. Lumbar.json. This is a JSON file that defines the build for your Lumbar project. You can call it whatever you want. The one that you get for free when you run the Thorax create project command is one called lumbar.json. And then you have to tell it where you want to deploy that to. And kind of the convention is you deploy it to a directory called public, although there's no real reason you have to do that. And in fact, in the example I'm going to run, I actually push it elsewhere. And then npm start. That's, by the way, this one last line is different than the documentation on the Thorax website unless they've accepted my pull request. They changed how you started the demo server, and the documentation is very confusing, and I always spent a good 10 or 15 minutes having to remember how to do it. So now, and usually by remember I mean looking at their code. Now I'm just going to put it in my slides, and also I've submitted a pull request to have them fix that, but it's npm start. To get the app started. And once you're started, you go to HTTP localhost 8000 and your Thorax app is running, you're ready to go, and you can start tweaking it and do whatever you want. What's nice about running npm start as it is npm start will also do your build for you. So I didn't technically have to do that fourth step, but I just wanted to show it to you anyway. npm start will run your build for you, and then as you make changes to the artifacts, the JavaScript and the CSS, it will detect that and it will run the build again for you, so you can just refresh your browser and keep going. One other command I want to share with you is lumbar watch is the name of the command. Watch is exactly the same thing as build. However, where build does it one time and it's out, lumbar watch will just continually watch the direct directory. The same as npm start will do for you indirectly. Lumbar watch will do that for you without starting the server up. Okay. Now the elements of a Lumbar build file, because Lumbar again is a build tool. Much like, well, I hate to use the comparison, but much like Maven's POM file or perhaps more friendly Gradle's build file, it has all these different things that define how the project is to be defined. So you got an application. It defines the root module. This is the module that the entire application, the JavaScript module that the entire application is going to be housed within. If you run the default Thorax command line tool, the name of the application is actually application. In the example I'm going to show you a little later, the name of the application, I changed it to S2GX for the purposes of our demo. You can call it whatever you want. This is the thing if you want to access certain types like your collections or your models or your views, and you want to create new instances of those things, you do it by way of this module. So in my example, I would say if I want to create a new instance of a session from the S2GX, and I'll show you the code in a moment, I just simply say new S2GX.collections, .models, .session, and create a new instance of session. It's pretty basic, simple. I'll show you what the build looks like here in a second. It's pretty basic, simple element in there that kind of just defines the high level of what the application is. Platforms. It's up to you. You just define whatever platforms you want. Out of the box, you're going to get iPhone, iPad, Android, and I believe the other one is web. Feel free to change those. And in fact, I think that's actually kind of a strange selection of choices, because it assumes that iPhone and iPad, well, there's a phone and a tablet, but Android, well, those are all the same. And we all know that's not true. But you can change it and do whatever you want. Now you define your packages. These are really more of a high-level course definition of what should go into a specific platform. You say, here's the modules that need to belong in iPhone. Here's the modules that need to belong in Android. And then you define the modules as logical groupings of code. So in my example, I have a base module that defines some common things like jQuery, or actually Zepto, and underscore, and Thorax itself, and a few other things that are going to go regardless of what device I'm going to. But then I also have an S2GX module that defines bits that are specific to my application, and I may have other modules that defines bits that are specific to a particular device. And when I create those packages, I define what goes into each one. Templates, these are client-side templates, just like handlebars. I believe you could probably just as easily work Mustache or Hogan or any of those other popular ones out. And if you want, handlebars is the one that you get when you're using Thorax. And styles, style sheet. Now, I've actually slid in some CSS style sheets. They work great. The ones you get out of the box are stylus, and honestly, I have no desire to actually slide in CSS if I don't have to. I like stylus quite some bit, and you may like Sass or less, and those are great choices as well, because they help you actually do a little bit of programming with your style sheet as opposed to just declaring how things should look. You get to actually define functions and variables that help you do that. Well, here's kind of a dive into the lumbar.json, and it's so big that I couldn't adequately fit it on a slide. So what I'm doing is focusing on an individual section at a time. So well, in this case, I'm focusing on two sections because I had enough room to do so. I've got an application. The application's name is application. In the example I'm going to show you in a minute, it's called S2GX. The primary module that's going to be part of this, which is the module that's going to be part of every one of these applications that gets deployed regardless of what device, is base. So a little later on, we're going to see a module known as base that's going to have some stuff in it. This is the one that goes with application. The platforms I'm going to support are Android, iPhone, iPad, web, and of course, like I said, you can change those. This is just simply declaring these are the ones that we're going to work with. When we get into packages, well, for the web package, I'm going to have platforms that say the platforms I'm going to support for this module, for this package or web. On the other hand, the native Hello World down there, the platforms that are supported there are Android, iPhone, and iPad. Now, there's going to be some common elements between these packages. Down, if you look at the native Hello World, I have modules defined base and Hello World. I've specifically called out those two modules and said these two modules, no matter what other modules I have in my project, these are the two that are going to be included for the native Hello World package. With web, I didn't call out any modules. And so by default, if you don't specify any modules, you get all the modules. Regardless of what they are, you get all modules are going to be sucked in and put into part of your site. In this particular example I pulled from is the Hello World you get when you run the Thorax command line client. Truth is, there's only two modules either way, so in either event you're going to get both of those modules, but in one place I'm calling it out, in one place I'm letting it be defined. Now the word combine, false or true, what this says is, are we going to take the CSS and the JavaScript, are we going to wrap those up in a single file, or are we going to just let the individual files go out? And it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to take underscore. If we say don't combine, we're not going to send the underscore library or the backbone library as individual JS files. What we're saying is the modules, per module, are we going to take each module's code and send it out as a single JavaScript or not? So within a module, all the JavaScript will be combined into a single module-specific JavaScript file. The question here is, are we going to take the ones for all the modules and combine those too? And so in the case of the mobile, what we're going to have, in the case of the web, what we're going to have is we're going to have the base.js, and we're also going to have Hello World.js. Those are going to get sent to the client. In the case of native Hello World, I've said combine true, we're going to get a single one that's sent to the client. Well, here's some modules, and for the sake of space, I've cut out a lot of the details, but left just enough to show you kind of the stuff you might want to throw in there. For the base module, I've got a set of scripts, and I've given them the source location. If you want to, if you just simply want to say JS/lib/ that will get pulled in as well. You don't have to put it in a structure as I've done here. It's going to be pulled in regardless of what platform it's on. Here I've said global true, which means it's going to go to all the platforms. Optionally down here, if you look down here with the styles, I've actually picked out specific styles, or I've picked out this style, the iPhone style, to go specifically to the iPhone platform. That style sheet will not go to Android or to the web platforms or the iPad. Down here I got some static files called out. I've said the static something index.html, it's going to end up at a destination called index.html in the generated site. Now notice I've actually called out a platform as part of that path. So at this point when it's doing the build, it's going to consider what the current platform is, and it's going to look in that path, in that directory. So if this is the web build it's working on currently, it's going to take whatever is at static/web/index.html, and it's going to copy that into the generated site at index.html. This allows you to define an individual HTML if you want to for each one of the sites, and it's going to pick that up as it does the build. But as you can see here, we've got all sorts of flexibility here on what we can define, what goes out specifically to individual devices versus what goes out globally to all devices, and there's a lot of different ways of mixing and matching these. That's kind of really the big strength of Lumbar is how that works. And style? Are you asking about the STYL? Yes, that's stylus. So the STYL extension, that's a stylus style sheet. What's going to happen as part of the build, it's going to run the stylus processing on it and ultimately generate a CSS. The nice thing about, I mean, I don't know how much work you've done with CSS, but CSS on its own is kind of a beating to work with. And stylus and other tools like it enable you to work at a more, you get to declare functions and such. It's a lot like Sass. It's very much like Sass or less, and those are the three I know of are Sass, less, and stylus. They're all very similar to each other.
And can we use Sass here?
Honestly, I don't know. I've never bothered switching out stylus for Sass or anything else because I'm a big fan of stylus. Stylus was the first one I learned, and I know it really well, so I've never bothered switching to any of the other ones. So, okay. Next section is the templates. This is where we're going to define all of where our handlebars templates go. And in this case, I'm just simply saying, hey, when you see for the view called index.js, include index.handlebars. The reason that we specified the view is it's not known at this point whether or not, at this part of the build, it's not known whether or not if that particular view is even going to make it into the device build that we're looking at. But if it does make it, we want to be sure and carry that its corresponding template with it. You see what I'm saying? We don't need to put the template in there if the view is not going to make it. And we don't need to put the view in there if the template's not going to be there because then it'll be broken. So we're essentially associating a view with its template. That way, when we do decide that, yes, in fact, this view, this backbone or thorax view is going to be in the built platform, device-specific build, then we do need to bring the handlebars over with it. And then finally, we get a chance to deal with some style-specific things. What we're looking at here is you get to set things like pixel density. It really by itself doesn't do anything, but because you're using a style sheet language like stylus, you can reference that in the style sheet. You can reference whatever the pixel density is for the device you're targeting and plug that into whatever style you need to. You couldn't do that with CSS, but here, since we are working with a language, a style language, not really a declarative one like CSS, but one that lets you to do a little bit more with variables and functions and whatnot, we can get this pixel density, plug it into the style sheet for whatever generated site we're dealing with. And then finally, it includes a handful of other things. There's a global style that's going to be pulled in for everybody. There's also a little plug-in for stylus called nib that it brings in, and there's some other things at this point you could also include if you wanted to. Honestly, I'll be honest, I don't remember what nib does. I knew it for like 5 minutes. I thought, oh, that's pretty cool, and then I totally forgot what it was. So look it up. When you do the stylus build, when you do the lumbar build, as I've shown, this is what you get. It's a little hard to read probably from the back, but you get a specific directory for each one of those devices. Notice the Android, the iPad, and the iPhone builds are quite similar to each other because they were pretty much defined identically in the build themselves. I mean, they didn't have to be, but they just were. The web one is a little different. We have an individual Hello World JS. We have an individual base JS, and likewise with the CSS files, as opposed to the other ones where those were all combined into a single JS and a single CSS file. The only exception being is when we're generating the CSS for these different devices, we also have the pixel density worked into the name. That way, if you're targeting a regular, old-fashioned iPad, like iPad first generation or second generation, versus a third generation where you have Retina display, you can pick a different style sheet for each one of those, and that's just using the same convention that the devices themselves use as far as the naming is concerned. Okay? Well, let me show you this demo. And where did you work that? Where did you work that in? Did you put it? No, you didn't. I'm going to invite you guys to play along, if you don't mind. I'm going to start off by showing you one bit of it first. And Roy, I'm using Roy's computer here, which is quite different than the one I'm used to using. So bear with me while I figure this all out. But if I were to go to s2gx. I guess you're on Firefox, aren't you? If I were to go to s2gx.cloudfoundry.com, oh, you've already got me a tab and everything. You're awesome. Well, I still need to log in, apparently. Is this it? There we go. I'm sorry? So if you go to s2gx.cloudfoundry.com, and I can see that Roy still has his device set to an iPhone. So I'm going to go just to a, yeah, that's awesome. Okay, I'm going to start over. Bear with me. If you come here, you see we have a very, very boring list of sessions from SpringOne 2GX. Why is it boring? I'll be honest with you. I just didn't bother styling it any prettier than that. And that's okay because I don't, I'm not here to show you pretty lists of sessions. I'm here to show you how this differs between the different projects. So when I go here, Spring Mobile took over. Spring Mobile, when you go to s2gx.cloudfoundry.com, I've got a web application out there that's pulling this data out of for what it's worth, a Neo4j database, throwing it out through Spring MVC as a REST API. Okay? On the client side, in the browser, I have my Thorax app with a collection set up to consume that REST API, suck it into a collection of sessions, and that's what you're seeing here. So when you first go to this page, there really is nothing on the page. In fact, if I did a view source at this point, at least I know it does it in my browser, there's nothing terribly interesting there other than the loading of some JavaScript and some style sheet stuff. It's dynamically loading that data by calling the REST API. In fact, if you want to do that, we can go to, trying to remember the URL, sessions. And here I'm getting sessions is just a big JavaScript object notation document containing all those sessions. I pull those in, and the Thorax client displays them for you like this. Now, it's terribly boring, though. I mean, I could have styled this better, and I could have impressed you more, but time ran out on me. What I will show you, though, is, looks like Roy has this still up. I've got this iPhone here, and we're going to do the same thing here. As you can see, it's styled very differently. I actually spent a little time on this one. Not an enormous amount of time, but I did spend a little time getting it styled a little differently. And so here I have the same list of sessions, but clearly presented differently. Whoops. I hate it when that happens. So now this doesn't do any more than that. I could have, gone and clicked on this and had it showing you the details of the sessions, that's just bonus material if I were to do that. This is demonstrating that when you go to the site here, even though this is serving up essentially the same content, and for the most part a lot of the same JavaScript, and even some of the same style sheet, we're seeing two very different styles. And if I were to take it even further and switch over to an iPad, which unfortunately is much larger than this window will allow me to see, so I'll scale it down. If I were to do the same thing here, with it not being on the mobile site, Spring MVC, Spring Mobile will pick it up and it's going to show it yet another way. Again, same server-side piece, many of the same client-side pieces, very different presentation on each one of those. Okay? Who wants to see the code? Do you have the text made up? Okay, great. All right, so let me show you the code for this, just to kind of bring it on home. What we have here is this the latest stuff? Yeah, it is. I believe so. What we have here is, just for convenience sake, I have a Gradle build that down near the bottom I have defined a handful of custom tasks. The one I want to point out to are the two almost at the top of the screen there, lumbar and lumbar watch. Essentially what this is doing is, this is so I can develop it locally. It's going to kick off the lumbar build process for me, so I don't have to actually use the lumbar command line directly. I can actually use it from Gradle. And you say, well, so what? Why would you ever want to do that when the command line's still there? Well, bear with me, I'll explain why. Lumbar watch, exactly the same thing, only it's using the lumbar's watch command to do that. Now the reason I want to do that from Gradle as opposed to doing it from just the command line on its own is because now I can tie it in with my war task. So when I'm building a war file, what it's going to do is it's going to build the lumbar portion, the lumbar built portion is the thorax code. It's going to build that for me, put it in a place where the war file knows how to pick it up. And there was some, in case anybody's wondering, there was some internal debate among just within myself on where that should land, and I'll explain my decision in a moment. But it is putting it in source main web app thorax is where I end up dropping that. So whenever I build a war file, I'm going to get that for free. Now because I did that, it doesn't really matter how I arrive at this. If I run Tomcat run, if I were to pull this into like Spring Source Tool Suite and run it within the TC server that's running in there, it really doesn't matter. Because it's living in source main web app thorax, I can serve it from wherever I happen to be running this, whether I deploy it as a war somewhere or whatnot. You saw me, I was running it on Cloud Foundry. By the way, while I'm discussing this, feel free to poke at it on your phone or your tablet and see if you see the same things I showed you. The reason I chose source main web app thorax is originally I didn't want it there. I wanted it in build because it seemed to me that a build time artifact belongs under the build folder. Anybody disagree with that? It seems right. The problem with that is it made it very, very difficult for me to do anything like do a Tomcat run. I had to do a Tomcat run war so that the war file would be generated first. And it made it just nigh unto impossible to go pull it into Spring Source Tool Suite and throw it in the TC server because I just could not figure out how to get the WTP task to pull that in as well. And it occurred to me that truly the project, the code that Lumbar generates is in fact source code. From the building of the war's perspective, it is source code. It's no different conceptually from the type of source code you might get from Roo, from Spring Roo when Roo generates those ITDs in the AJ files. It's still put in your source folder. It just so happens to be source folder that you're not supposed to touch. Likewise here, I don't encourage you, if you were to follow this process, I don't encourage you to change anything under source main web app thorax because when you run the build next time, it's going to override it. That's why I put it in its own directory as opposed to just dropping it right there in web app proper. I put it in its own folder within web app so that sort of a fence around it, don't touch this stuff. Okay? Now, within the project, digging a little further, if I go to source main web app and go look at the Spring configuration. What do I got here? I've got just some of the basic, the site preference stuff, the device web argument resolver stuff, the same stuff that Roy has already shared with you. He shared it with you on a white background, so it's probably easier to read, but a lot of the same configuration that he showed you. And then back over here in the controller, I did not use a site switcher. And the main reason I didn't use a site switcher was twofold. Number one is when I actually started this example, this site switching that supported tablets stuff wasn't in place. Roy, in fact, I was sort of the one who kicked him into actually getting that going. And then he did, and then I didn't use it, so my bad. And another reason is I got a little bit of concern, and although I could set up the paths correctly to work around this issue, but I got concerned that Spring MVC is serving two things here. It's serving ultimately a redirect for the purposes of site switching to an individual JavaScript file, but it's also serving a REST API. And I did not want it to site switch my REST API because that would be bad. So me and Roy were actually talking about it yesterday. I don't know what the plan is yet, but we're probably going to think of a way to avoid site switching on a REST API, perhaps picking out an exclusion. Don't site switch on this path, that kind of stuff. We'll keep you informed on how that goes. But meanwhile, down in my controller, I've got a session controller that really doesn't do a heck of a lot other than when you do I'm sorry, I picked the wrong controller. I have my home controller. That's what I meant to show you. It simply takes you don't have your key set up the same as mine. So never mind. I was going to zoom in for you guys, but maybe Roy can do that while I'm figuring it out. It simply just checks the device. Using device injection, it checks the device. Is it mobile? We're going to redirect to the mobile application that Lumbar generated. If it's a tablet, we're going to go to the tablet application that Lumbar generated. And otherwise, we're just going to go to the default, the web application. Okay? And even though it's technically not part of this talk to kind of complete it, I was going to show you the session controller. This is just my REST API. Nothing fancy here. I'm just using Spring MVC with a couple of resource mappings and specifically some response bodies there to serve a REST API as opposed to a human-facing website. And as I said, there's a repository injected there. The repository is a Spring Data Neo4j repository. Okay? One more thing, and we'll call it good. Down here in the source main, got to get my bearings of where I'm at. Source main Thorax portion of the application. Here's where my lumbar build is. The lumbar build has the application S2GX. It's pulling in base. Actually, I started with the same lumbar build that the Thorax tool gave me. I've got 3 platforms defined, as we've already discussed: mobile, tablet, and web. I got the various packages, the stuff for the web, the stuff for the native. And if you'll scroll up a little bit more, Roy. No, the other way. I'm sorry. Scroll the content up. There we go. I just want to do this and make it work. It doesn't help, though. And here I've just got all those scripts. In fact, many of these scripts are the exact same scripts that came out of the default. I've just thrown in there for good measure a few of my own as well. And just to keep this going. So what I got is, let's see if I can find the ones that I added in. I got a few styles that are custom. So I created a custom tablet style, mobile style, and web style. These are real heavily with whatever stylus information I had to put in there to make it look like what you saw when I showed you on the individual devices. I've got the same static I showed you here for, how'd you do that? Okay, good. I have the same static I showed you here to pull in the index.html for each platform. So there is a slightly different home page depending on whether it's mobile or tablet or not. And then I defined a handful of routes. Now this is something that's kind of unique to Lumbar. You don't have to do this, but if you are using it with Thorax, you can do things like define routes here and map them to functions within your backbone/Thorax router. And so what I'm saying here is, in absence of a route, or if the route is sessions, go to the sessions route. If the route is session/some session ID, go to the session detail route. That's not a route I showed you today because that route isn't working yet, but This is actually in GitHub, and we're going to polish it up and finish it up, and you guys can check it out and play with it when we're done. I've got a handful of other scripts that define the model, the sessions collection, a couple of different views, and of course my main applications router that's going to contain those methods, the sessions and the session detail methods. And then as I showed you before, there's some templates, there's the pixel density, not a whole lot to talk about there. Just these are the different templates that are included and associated with that sessions JS file. Okay? And with that, I've concluded this portion of the demo. What I would like you to do, though, again, feel free to poke at this on your own browser, on your own iPhone, on your own iPad. We'll make this code available in GitHub, and you guys can check it out. In fact, it's already there under the Spring Source umbrella at Spring Mobile Samples, so if you want to check that out. And I'm going to hand it off to Roy to take us home.
Yeah, so part of our goal for this presentation was really to show you the basic functionality of Spring Mobile, and then Craig was going to show you a much more complicated example, and I think we've accomplished that. So the good news is that all this stuff is available on GitHub, both the project and the samples. If you go to the Spring Mobile showcase, or excuse me, samples repository under the Spring Source umbrella, you can see all of the examples that I showed, plus the thorax and lumbar stuff that Craig showed you. And we're really excited about how we can help you guys adapt to the changing world in terms of handling mobile devices and the different things that are out there. It's highly rumored that iPad's going to have a 7-inch version coming out soon. So, there's always this changing landscape of devices and resolutions and capabilities. And at Spring, we're always going to try to stay on top of those things for you and assist you in whatever ways we can. So thank you all for coming today. And any questions?
Well, thank you very much. No, the only thing you have to do, because I'm using in the question was once you have this up and running, I believe you said in Spring Source Tool Suite, and you make changes to any of the Thorax specific artifacts, the JavaScript or CSS or any of that stuff, are those changes going to be live? Yeah, well, you'll at very least have to refresh your browser. That's one of the things you definitely have to do. But also, that's one of the reasons I had that lumbar watch in place, so that when I make the change, lumbar watch will run the build for me. The only downside of lumbar watch I've noticed is if you do anything that confuses it, it'll just crash and you have to restart it. But it's kind of annoying. Most of the time you can get away with it, but I've managed to confuse it a few times. It keeps running. It's going to keep monitoring your changes. It's going to keep building the Thorax sites for all the different devices. The one thing you are going to have to do in STS is you're going to have to refresh at least the web apps directory so it'll pull that new stuff in. Because STS is not watching those changes. That's the only, so essentially you have to hit F5 on that folder and then refresh your browser and you're back in business. Actually, I went through a great deal of pain this week. I actually stopped what I was doing. I just said, I'm going to stop this and I'm going to make this happen, because I was actually doing it the hard way before that, and it was actually slowing me down like you would not believe. So I'm not happy the fact that I have to refresh the IDE, but it's much better than what I was doing before that. So I'm okay with it.
Great. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
The example that you showed at the beginning of the presentation, Gmail obviously was built with GWT, and there are some of the same problem spaces here. I'm wondering if you want to compare and contrast GWT type solution with some of the things that you showed.
Well, GWT is fine. It's great, and there's been a lot of great applications. Certainly the Google applications, they're doing a great job with that. I don't have a strong opinion for or against GWT, although I will say that it just feels wrong for me to write Java code that gets compiled into JavaScript. There's just something that just doesn't set well with me. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it doesn't make me comfortable. And I prefer, if I'm going to work with a JavaScript if I'm going to write JavaScript code, if I'm going to deploy a JavaScript application, what makes me comfortable is writing JavaScript. So,
great. Yes, sir.
There's a handful that I've not explored. I'm familiar with at least one. and if you'll give me a second, I'll try to pull it together. I think it's called Brunch, and Brunch actually kind of does some of the same scaffolding stuff, as I understand it anyway, that Thorax does. At the same time, also does some of the same building kind of stuff that Lumbar does. To what degree they're similar to Thorax and Lumbar, I just haven't had an opportunity to explore, but that's one I've become familiar with. I also know there's one called Grunt, and I got the impression that Grunt is more of a more like Thorax and less like Lumbar, but I also have seen some references to it that where people are using it to help with their builds. So again, you might want to look into that. I can't say it's at all like either of those, but I'm familiar with it. I've heard of it, and it sounds like it falls into the same camp.
Great. So just to let you know, Craig and I will both be at the BOF sessions tonight, the Spring Web BOF session. So
Obviously.
if you haven't, yes, obviously. So if you have any other questions, we'll be happy to talk to you about Spring Social, Spring for Android, Spring Mobile, any of the projects that we're working on. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.